Hey y'all, this is Little Sister Chris, and if you have not looked at the page or the channel by now, to know that I am a therapist in my day job. I am a mental health therapist in my day job, and my niche is grief and loss. And that mainly for me in this space includes death of a loved one, colleague, all of the above. But grief also encompasses other losses because, once you start to, once you're in bereavement or you're mourning the loss of someone, there's other losses that's involved with grief. There's also like a loss of self and identity, as we have talked about on this podcast before. And then there's also so many things around the loss of trust, even if that trust is in yourself, and the loss of trust in other people, depending on how your loved one died. But the loss of my brother really in my late 30s fueled my desire to practice in more grief and loss issues than anything general. I started out in this field thinking more kid-based, more generalized mental health, and I found myself more like burned out. And I used to work for, I've had a lot of jobs. I've worked in school-based therapy. I worked in case management. I worked in residential. I've been a road warrior throughout the state of Tennessee. I lived in Southwest Virginia, in Blacksburg, Virginia, and was in a school therapist in Pulaski, Virginia, which is very small and rural. Also in Blacksburg, was in a couple of elementary schools there. Loved the job, just didn't like the area. Loved the people I worked with, just didn't like the area. So came back home to Nashville. And when I came back home to Nashville, I decided to go back to school. I thought I was going to go get my doctorate, but I'm glad I did not get that at the time. I was going to go back and get my doctorate because I felt like I wanted to go into academia. But the Lord was like, I think you're putting the cart before the horse. I need you to pursue your licensure. And at the time, when I was in grad school, I didn't know the value of being licensed. I had no clue. I thought it was just something else to do. And I was like, I don't want to be licensed. So at the time, my mental health counseling grad school only had like a certain hours that you take and you can graduate. But if you wanted to do licensure, you could take those hours too. So I just took the amount of hours to graduate. So I had to go back to school and take additional 12 hours back in 2017. So a full year from January to December and a whole nother internship. Y'all, I had been out of school since 2011. So 6 years after me graduating with my master's degree in counseling, I had to go back to school in 2017 to take additional classes. One of those classes was grief. And grief is not a curriculum that is offered in a lot of universities, whether that's undergrad or grad school, and even med schools and nursing schools. It is not offered. And if it is offered, it's seen as an elective. And for what I'm hearing, people really enjoy grief classes, but it's not offered a lot. So if you had a grief curriculum in your school or certification and things like that, you are very much blessed to have that, because a lot of people come out of grad school without even taking a single class in grief. And grief and trauma are so much interconnected. There's trauma informed and there's grief informed, and I am both. Grief informed means that I provide restorative spaces for healing in grief. There is a language, definitely a language, just like in trauma informed, there is a language that I use, that I don't say, oh, you should, or get over. we are processing through. And one thing that I don't rely heavily on is the 5 stages of grief. Because if you are anywhere in layman's terms, people always throw out the 5 stages of grief. And truly, it has its purpose, like my good friend Thomas Castro said in our previous episodes some months ago. But there's more in the processing of grief. So there is going back and forth between the expectation that you once had of your loved one in the future, and then realizing that that expectation is no longer there, and then grieving that. There is moving on and making new things in your life and having new goals in your life, but then going back and reminding yourself or having those thoughts where, you know, once that person was there at that time, but going back between reality and loss. It doesn't talk about grief fogs at all. It doesn't talk about clarity of mind. It doesn't talk about spiritual disconnection. It doesn't talk about the 4 tasks of mourning. There's so much more in grief and loss therapy than Kubler-Ross and David Kessler. There's so much more for those who are in therapy, and a lot of therapists are not well versed in grief and loss. They could be in trauma, and that could be very well helpful. But when it comes to grief and loss specifically, they might not be well versed. So I have that niche, and it's personal to me. I know I ran from this work for a very long time, and it wasn't until COVID when I started to get my own therapy from a Black woman. And she was very knowledgeable of grief and asked me questions and how it affected my relationships, my intimate relationships, my familiar relationships, my platonic relationships, how I see life and my perspectives and my judgment. It mattered because I was 14 years old. And when you lose so young, your brain development changes. Like, there's brain development in your early years all the way up to about 24, 25 years old. And when you lose in childhood, that affects your brain development. And I used to say to people, even if you're older, I used to say to people, it like affected my very DNA. Like, it was so deep that I feel like my DNA changed. And that's true even if you were over the age of brain development. But I truly felt that way as a 14-year-old, and I just didn't have the words to express it. A lot of our kids don't have the words to express, I'm hurting, I feel a change. Instead, we act out or find other means to self-soothe. There's so much in grief and loss, but it is my niche, and I am educating corporations, educating churches, individuals, families on grief and loss issues, the new identification from Bob Nehemiah about pandemic grief, and how we haven't even begun to understand how that's affecting us. We will probably see it in the next generation, pandemic grief, and how it has deeply affected us mental health wise, emotional, spiritual. So there's a lot, and I'm just glad that you all are following me, because it's not just about surviving sibling loss, even though I'm a survivor and I'm moving into more thriving because I feel like my work is causing me to thrive. The podcast has helped me to thrive because connecting with other siblings has been I'm getting emotional about it. Connecting with other siblings has been the best thing that could ever happen. One of the best things that could ever happen to me, because for so long the journey was isolating, scary, lonely. Even if you have other siblings, I don't have other siblings, so I will always be faced with the fact that I will never be a natural aunt. I will never be TT Chris, even though I do have kids that call me TT and auntie and stuff like that. I just never would know what my brother's kids would look like, and what his life would be like, and what he would do, around certain issues in my life right now, what he would say. I know he would beat up a lot of people. I know that because my brother was rough. Or maybe he'd be calmed down in his 40s. I don't know. Who's to say? But, I would want you guys to, if you want to reach out to me, my information is in the channel information about grief bookings and sponsors and surviving sibling loss podcast sponsors, donations, and the like. I am now full-time in private practice. I had to wait to tell people that because I didn't tell my own family that I went into full-time private practice. I probably told, the people that I left the job, I told them. But, they don't know my people. I didn't really tell anybody until maybe a month after I left my job, my full-time job, to go to my full-time entrepreneurship. And because I didn't want to tell many people, because I had a really good job, but it was just a job, I had a really good state government job, and I've had really good jobs, and I just decided it was time to go. It was time to walk out on faith and provide grief and loss service. And that's what I'm doing in my new space, my new office. I'll show you my new office, and yeah, it's an adjustment. It's an adjustment. I thought that I would be laying around on some days. I thought that I wouldn't be driving as much, but I'm actually very busy. I sat in front of my computer the other day after church and was sitting for about 6.5 hours. Next thing I know, it was dark and I'm still sitting in my church clothes. I don't really technically do that. I don't remember the last time I did that unless I was in school and I was working after church. But yeah, it was just a lot of stuff that I needed to get done. I still have a ton of stuff to do, notes and all of that, and insurance stuff, and payment collection and all that stuff I need to do. And I need my oil change, and I need my lights changed in my house, and I need my air filters changed, and I need to do all that and find time to do that. I need to go to the gym tomorrow. So life is lifing in so many good ways, and there's some challenges, of course. Life doesn't come without its challenges, but I just wanted to give you an update. I do have a session coming out. I'm gonna have to split it because it's 3 hours in totality. So I'm gonna have to split it and edit for YouTube, and I probably will edit it maybe in either two or three parts, just depending. I think it'll be 3 parts. It'll be an hour each, maybe, or 45 minutes each. I don't know. But it's a group session with more and new siblings. We have a husband and wife in this session. And we have a grief therapist, another grief therapist in this session, all the way from California. And we just had a really good, I believe it was a Saturday night where we were having this big, long conversation. And it was so restorative. It truly was restorative to even have a husband and wife team on there, and to have a male represented in Surviving Sibling Loss Forgotten Mourners podcast, because we haven't had many males come on, but it's always good to have guys come on and talk about their grief and loss of, their siblings, and even brothers and sisters-in-laws that they've lost that are just like their siblings. So I am excited, and I am anticipating a really bigger guest coming. in November. And so looking at getting some things put in place so that it looks very sharp and edited very well for that. All of the edits and all the stuff that comes with this channel, I do myself. And it takes a very long time to get it done. Oh my gosh. If you've ever uploaded a longer video on on YouTube, it takes hours to get it downloaded. Sometimes I'm like, forget it, I'm gonna throw this computer out the window. Oh my gosh. And then Canva, I can spend hours and hours. You know that whole song by her? Is that her? Hours and hours and hours. Baby, that's me and Canva. Me and Canva go together like real bad. And so I can be in Canva for hours. It don't do right sometimes. I be wanting to break up with it. But then at the same time, I'm hooked. They got hooks in me. And so, yeah. So I appreciate you all for supporting the podcast. For being here as long as you have been here. For those people who I don't know who are following and supporting the podcast, as well as my journey into private practice, my journey as a grief therapist here in Tennessee. I also do consult work. So if you're outside of Tennessee, grief consult work, I'm available to you. Not to do therapy, but to do consult, and peer support groups are coming up too. So I'm excited about all the work. I'm working on so much. I don't want to always say what I'm doing because, people even though, my work is my work, but people really do be stealing. So, and speaking of, there are so many podcasts out there now for surviving siblings out there, which is really good. Because it allows people to heal, to listen, to connect to other siblings and other podcasts. When I started this podcast in 2019 in the audio only space, there was absolutely no podcast in 2019 that was specifically for surviving siblings. I did my research because they tell you in podcast world, I went to a podcast conference back in 2019. They tell you, do your due diligence. Okay. So I did my due diligence with both of my podcasts at the time and found out there was absolutely no surviving sibling loss, the Forgotten Mourners podcast. So I came out with my podcast on Spreaker as audio only back in October 2019. So I'm just celebrating 4 years in the podcast world, even though I started Get Naked Therapist back in June of 2019. But 4 years of podcasting for Surviving Sibling Loss, the Forgotten Mourners podcast. So just to let you know, there are other podcasts out there. And which is good news now. Since the pandemic, people have started podcasting more about grief and loss, and specifically surviving siblings. They just don't call their podcast Surviving Siblings. But there is another podcast out there that is similar to my name. It's very similar, but we are not the same. So, support your fellow surviving siblings. But just want to make sure moving forward, because there's going to be so much happening in the next quarter. Moving forward, we are not the same. Thanks, we are not the same. But sending love, sending blessings to all of those who are surviving siblings, the forgotten mourners. Truly, it's just not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling to be a surviving sibling. There's many dark days and nights. And we just send love. We are growing our family here in a bittersweet way. We're growing our family. And we just send love, blessings, and warm hugs to every sibling, and especially to siblings who come on podcasts and share their stories. This ain't easy. It takes full courage to share your face, your story, where you live, for people to watch on YouTube. And trust me, when I first started, it was me in my kitchen eating breakfast and just talking while I'm eating, not knowing if anybody was going to be listening, but I was just really talking to myself. And sometimes these videos feel like I'm talking to myself if there's not another sibling out there talking with me. But yeah, I just wanted to give you guys that update. Hopefully it makes sense, because I feel like I've been rambling, but I don't be editing that as much. It's just like an old school audio only episode, but you're getting it in YouTube, so you can see my blue, because my blue is the color of my business. So I will wear different colors, shades of blue, because grief is like being thrown into the ocean and forced to find your way back to shore. So depending on where you are in grief, heard it here first. Depending on where you are in grief, the darker blue, the color of the ocean. So you'll see me wear dark blue. You'll see me wear lighter when you're closer to the shore, almost to walking stage, walking to stand up, shallow water. You'll see me wear different shades of blue. And my nails are blue, although I do have this one as sunshine on, not a cloudy day, but sunshine on blue skies. There we go, sunshine, blue skies. That's how I wanted my nails to look. So I can set the ambiance when I'm talking about grief and loss, and when the people are in my office. So book me to come speak about surviving sibling loss, or to come talk about grief and loss in the holiday season for your business, your school, your organization, your group. I'm available. I am at tpgcc.com. That is T as in talk, P as in Paul, gcc.com, or TP Grief Counseling and Consulting at gmail.com. All right, little sister is out. Have a good rest of your day or night or weekend, whatever time y'all are watching this video. I love you guys. I have to tell you about my office. I will download that soon. I have to tell you about it. Love you. Bye.